I had almost forgotten the DUI experience of teaching in the DUI classes, but since Reverend Judith brought it up, it's a wonderful metaphor, too. People would come into the classes and understand they didn't want to be there. They really didn't want to be there. How many of you, I won't ask you how many of you have had a DUI, be an unfair question, but how many of you might have had to go to driving school? Yeah, right. And interesting, it wasn't your fault. They were out to get you, I understand. But what would happen, interestingly, for the folks who had a DUI is they would come in, they wouldn't look at you. And then they would go to the back of the room and move the last row of chairs up against the wall and then lean against the wall. And the statement is, I'm not here. Get that. I'll tell you, to be someplace for 2 hours and not be there is just so painful. Because 2 hours goes forever when you're not there. And you can't go anywhere else. Now, something else I noticed about that was that most of the folks who leaned up against the wall who weren't there, they came back. They didn't learn much. They tended to forget that drinking and driving wasn't really a good combination. And I'd see them for the 9-month program or for the 18-month program. And what I learned from that metaphorically, which is interesting, is that if you don't show up for your life for the 2-hour program, oh, you'll be there for the 9-month program. Something will happen that you'll have to start showing up. And one of the things that we do is we put ourselves on hold. I'm going to show up when everything is right, when life is good enough to require my presence. And all of a sudden you notice that your life is half gone, and you're not very practiced at showing up. And you're not very practiced at showing up because you decided either that you weren't important enough or that the game of life wasn't important enough for you to be a player. And when you opt out of the thing called your own life, you may get so comfortable with that that you don't notice it. And after a while, you don't know that you're not there. You just know something's missing. And so request number 1 for each of you is to start showing up in your own life like it makes a difference, like who you are as somebody. Now, what Reverend Judith was saying, which is interesting, is that we often get trained, unfortunately, that who we are is not that important, not that valuable, and it would just be nice if you would be quiet. You remember the old adage, children should be seen but not heard? My father modified that, children shouldn't be seen or heard. We did our absolute best, and he was agreeable as long as we were not seen or heard. And there wasn't any space for any of us. That's why he had 7 kids. And the interesting thing is, when you grow up in a family of 7, there's not going to be a lot of space. And you are inclined to actually not think that you need any space because since you haven't been given any, it must not be that important. Any of you ever noticed that you don't take a space for yourself? And you don't take a space for yourself until everyone else is seated? You don't take a space for yourself until everybody else has been loved? You don't take a space for yourself in your own life until you have a chronic or serious disease and you require a bed in a hospital? And somebody says, you've got a space now. Wow, I wonder why I didn't create a space for me earlier. I wonder why I didn't create a space for me where I really counted. I wonder why I didn't give myself permission to be present in my own life. So many of us will do spiritual exercises, spiritual practices. We do them so that eventually when we show up, we'll be right. We don't do them as a kind of, I belong and I have value and I'm important. And there's a critical difference between doing everything right because it needs to get done and being present for yourself however you need to be, however you can be, so that you're really there in your life. And I had this experience, as I told you, of growing up in a family where we weren't really wanted. And I'm not sure how parents do that, where they don't want kids, so they have 7 of them. And there was some technology available. They could have had limits on this, but they didn't have any technology, I guess, and at least not after 7 o'clock in the evening. So there we were, all of us. And I had a blanket. That was what I had, a small blanket, and that was my bed. And wherever we lived, wherever you could lay down the blanket, that was your space. And we had enormous fights between us because some of my brothers or my sister would get on my blanket. They would touch my blanket. That was my space. It wasn't a very big space, but it was my space. I think I didn't realize the impact of that on my life until many, many years later when I became a therapist. And one of the things that happens when you become a therapist, hopefully, is you also have to get therapy. Because the assumption is that you didn't necessarily become a therapist because everything was perfect. And unless you know a little bit more about you than the average person, you're not going to know much about you, and you're going to bring that ignorance into your sessions, and you're going to be as dumb as the person that you're talking to about what's going on. So you need to have some information. And so you wake up and you look at this thing, and the therapist I had said, tell me about your space. And I said, what about it? Is it okay? Is it clean? And she said, you know what you need to do is you need to create a space for you. And this is what I want you to do. And it sounded totally insane. She said, I want you to go to a restaurant, and I want you to let them know this is your restaurant, and that you're going to be coming to this restaurant on a fairly regular basis, and that you just need to have them know who you are. I said, okay, I can do it. It sounded crazy. I went to the restaurant, and I had had restaurant experiences. Most of you have. You go into the restaurant, and there's somebody spread out on a table having their 5th cup of coffee, reading the newspaper, or having their laptop computer on now so that they actually don't have to have a relationship with anybody in the room. And they're there like they belong there. I thought going to the restaurant, as you get in, you try not to offend anybody, order as quickly as you can, something that's relatively convenient for them to prepare, eat and get out, and give a reasonable enough tip that they'll let you back in the next time. I had no idea that I could actually walk into a restaurant, my restaurant. So I did. I said to the waitress, this is going to be my restaurant. And she looked at me, wondered what kind of medicine I was taking. And I came back the next day, and she said, oh, you're back. And I said, yeah, this is my restaurant. And I ordered coffee, and I took longer with that coffee than I normally would. I just didn't drink it and run like you're supposed to so the next person could come in that had a space. And so I drank it, and I took some extra time, and I got to know the waitress a little bit. And before long, when I would meet people, I would say, you want to have a cup of coffee? Yeah, where can we go? Let's go to my place. And they'd come in, and the restaurateur would say, oh, hi, Bob, nice to have you here. And I'd sit down, and I had a place. And suddenly I recognized the power of having decided that I needed a space, that it was okay to have one. You see, we often go through our lives thinking we're going to get some space later. Space for fun, space for joy, space for meditation and yoga, space for a walk. But we're often trained that the best thing you can possibly do is put yourself aside and take care of other people until you're used up. And then people say, well, what happened to you? Well, I didn't have a space, so I finally wore out. Trying to live a life with no space for me is really not much of a life at all. I know people that are actually dying from the fact that they gave up having a space for themselves so long ago that dying is a natural consequence. You don't require a lot of space after you're dead. It's a natural outcome. It doesn't have to be. And so as we allow ourselves to have more space for living and we allow ourselves to treat ourselves better, what begins to happen is we experience life very differently, not just in the space that we have, but in the consciousness that we bring to that space. So one of the things, I haven't done it here yet, I'm going to. Whenever I move into a community, I go to the bank and I say, I'd like to meet the bank president. What did we do wrong? Nothing. Do you have an account here? Yes, I do. And I never wear a ski mask going in, so they should be able to talk to me. And I go and I said, I'd like to meet the president. I'm one of your accounts. It's not a big one, but I'm going to be here on a regular basis. I wanted to say hi. You what?